All right, welcome back to Please Read Your Book. My name's Carl and I talk about books, and this video is 5 great lit fic books that I read in 2024. This is my last of the 5 great books of 2024 series. I think I've kind of milked it as far as I could, but I do read really widely, and so I just wanted to make videos that give people a snapshot of what I read, and of course literary fiction is part of that. So here we go. Like my other videos, these are not ranked in any order. I'm not saying that one is better than the other or anything like that. And let's go. So first one is Last Night by James Salter. I'm not sure if that's focusing or not because my vision is really bad. Yeah, this is a collection of short stories. James Salter, to me, is one of the great kind of unknown, or yeah, I think he's pretty widely unknown, great American writers. Tends to kind of always have been under the radar, famously known as the writer that other writers like. So he's written quite a few novels and other collections of short stories. I read this one last year. I had never seen this one before, although it was published in, I want to say 2005. Didn't do my homework because I suck at BookTube. Yeah, this was published in 2005. This edition published in 2006. So the thing I really love about the stories in this collection, and particularly of Salter in general, is that he is really just fantastic at writing incredibly short stories. I mean, some of these stories are only 3 or 4 pages, and he is able to pare down the story to that sort of decisive moment, or that moment or that point in time when a character's life suddenly changes. And it's not always so overly dramatic, too. What can often make that so powerful is that the characters are unaware of the change, and yet the change has happened, and we see that in the world around them or in the other characters around them. Or the characters know that something has changed, but they don't fully understand it. And that lack of understanding is going to have some pretty powerful consequences. So I think in that sense, James Salter is he's a realist. I mean, he writes realistic, very realistic stories about very real people. Really powerful writer. I'd put him on the level of like Raymond Carver, particularly with his short stories. I think they're 2 great short stories writers, but James Salter is someone that kind of never really gets a lot of attention. I mean, it's very famous. He has passed away, and a lot of times when you read biographies of him, it's something that's mentioned that he just never really took off as a writer, despite always being praised and acclaimed as a writer. So there you go. Next one. This was a big one for me. Hard Rain Falling by Don Carpenter. With an introduction, of course, by George Pelecanos, which I think is something interesting worth talking about. So this book, I had always kind of avoided this book. I had tried to read it twice before in the past, as it had always kind of been recommended as a crime book. And it's not a crime book at all. It's really just a story. It's a very tragic story, very American type of tragedy of 2 characters. There's basically one main character and kind of his partner. But it has this introduction by George Pelecanos. Pelecanos is definitely a modernist noir writer. He even wrote for like The Wire. I think he's written a few other TV scripts, or he's been a writer on a few other TV shows. Very good writer. But this book really is just a tragedy. And it's a very American tragedy. I kept thinking of like, there's a kind of like Beautiful Loser type stereotype in a lot of, I would say, mid to late 20th century film and songs and movies. Well, I said film, but books, you know, of just sort of like a working class guy who doesn't have much education and unknowingly just makes lots of bad choices, and then knowingly makes even more bad choices. And basically just, life is just a series of hard knocks. What really struck me about this was just like, how many hard knocks could a guy take? This book tells you. This book really tells you. On a prose level, it's really very straightforward and plain, but very well crafted without feeling like it's been pared down purposely. Although it was purposely written in a plain and straightforward way. Don Carpenter, in a couple of interviews, has said that he wanted to write a literary novel that everyone could read, that people would not be turned off by at the sentence level, it's kind of at a time when people would often be turned off by literature. And he does that. He does it extremely well. I think it's just a fantastic book. Pretty daring book too. I mean, there is a gay romance in here. I don't mean romance is in the literary style of romance, but like there's literally like they develop a relationship for each other. So really good. Also some very powerful commentary on the prison system and the alleged criminal justice system. So really great book. Definitely worth checking out. Okay, so the next one, sorry, I had to do an edit there because I completely bungled a few things here. Love in a Fallen City by Eileen Chang. So Eileen Chang is a Shanghaiese, or was a Shanghaiese writer. She was born in Shanghai, lived in Shanghai, Hong Kong, and America, and probably plenty of other places in between, and often went back and forth between one of the 2 or 3 of those places. So she has a very interesting life. These stories are largely set in Shanghai and Hong Kong. And what really struck me about these stories were 2 things. One is just the depiction of life in Shanghai and Hong Kong and China as a whole during the 1930s and into the early 1940s, because that was a time when World War II was spilling over into China. Britain's power and grasp over China was, still quite prevalent. They were still very influential. America was beginning to have an influence, and of course Japan was having its incursions into China as well. And then of course also just a lot of the internal struggles. So, there's like all this upheaval that's happening in the background politically and socially and economically, and that really shapes the lives of the characters, like where they're choosing to live, how they choose to do business, where they choose to study, where they send their kids to school, things like that. But the other thing that I really liked about this too was just like the depiction of relationships, often familial. I mean, you can't write about China or Chinese culture without talking about Chinese families, because family and culture in China are just so tightly intertwined, and how powerful families are in influencing characters' lives, even when they don't like that influence, when they want to resist that influence and sort of spread their wings and have some independence and things like that. So it's very good, really interesting stories. Also just a really just great writer. If you just want to read pieces and get an idea of slice of life back then. I was surprised to learn too that she's still very popular in China. I bought this here. I've got another collection of hers on the shelf too. Funny story, I was reading this at lunch at work one day, and my department head, who is a woman from Shanghai, she's lived here her whole life, she was so surprised to see me reading this because she had read this when she was in university as a student. So pretty interesting. So definitely worth checking out. So Love in a Fallen City by Eileen Chang. And the next one, I did a longer video about this, The Sorrow of War by Bao Ninh. This was a reread for me, but I'd read it so long ago that this time it really felt like kind of first time reading it. I remembered certain pieces of the narrative, but I saw it very differently this time. This is the story of a North Vietnamese soldier after the war with America, and he has been tasked with collecting bodies from kind of a patch of jungle south of Saigon, so south of Ho Chi Minh City. It kind of near, I think it's supposed to be like around in the Cu Chi area, if you've been to Vietnam, as so many people do now as tourists. But it's not a war novel in the sense of you don't get depictions of battles and platoons moving and soldiering and soldiers' life and all that. It's really largely centered around a period of life before the war, kind of in the build-up to the American war, and then after, right at the very near end of when the Americans finally left in '75. In fact, there is a scene here where the narrator and his platoon are storming the Saigon airport and kind of chasing off American soldiers. It's pretty interesting, very interesting scene actually. But a lot of it is really just about the loss of war. I mean, that is really the sorrow of war in here. So, the narrator basically loses everyone and everything in his life. And the reason for all of that loss is partially, obviously, because of fighting in the war. People will, there was a lot of death, but also just like his own personal sacrifices by becoming a soldier and having to fight and having to basically give over himself to fight for his cause. The trade-off is he will lose other aspects and parts of his life. So it's very good. It's also written in a really, really interesting, kind of almost metafictional, autofiction way. There are points in the narrative where we're not sure who the narrator is. Is it the author, Bao Ninh? Or is it the main character? Or, what's going on? And it shifts very quickly, will shift back and forth in time, and it will shift from memory to the actual narrative story to a flashback and repeat that again, and kind of new information will be added. So it's a very interesting book, very sophisticated book. So, and it's not your very typical Vietnam War book. So that's worth checking out. That's The Sorrow of War by Bao Ninh. And the last one I don't have here, sorry, it's on my Kindle, which I don't have with me. It was the Motel Life by Willie Vlautin. And I also did another video on that. This is the first book I've read by Willie Vlautin, and I really was blown away and have become a big fan. I've bought a few others. Ashamed to admit I haven't read them yet. There's only can only read so much at one time. This was a great novel, and a pretty short novel, but a really fast read. I was really struck with two things. One is Vlautin's prose. If you've watched any of my videos, I really like straightforward, plain prose. I don't like purple language very much. I don't like flowery, poetic language. And Vlautin really writes in a very straightforward, plain way. But also, this book is really about brotherhood and loyalty, and two brothers that stick together through a bunch of just horrible events and life decisions and life choices that you learn about very quickly. And then as the story progresses, you learn to realize that one of the main reason why these guys just do bad stuff or make just horrible life decisions, I mean, they really are just like, we would call them losers in society. They've just never been given a chance. They're the product of a broken home, coming from a very poor, poverty-stricken area, and just the kind of people that just never got started in life because society just never gave them a chance, never gave them that sort of spark to get the fire going. Having said that, it's not, it's not a tearjerker. It's not like a sympathetic, like, oh, woe is me, or let's feel sorry for these kinds of people story. It's not that at all. But you definitely pick up on that aspect that, yeah, not only are these guys losers, but they were kind of born into it, and they'll die in it. So the story, to give a quick synopsis, there's two brothers, kind of pretty much down on their luck, living in motels. This is why it's called the Motel Life. Both drinking very heavily. And one night, one of them runs over a kid with his car and flees the scene. And that kind of sets in motion a series of events where they go on the run and they make a bunch of bad decisions and they're running out of money and do a whole bunch of stupid things, and everything just goes downhill from there. So, fantastic book, The Motel Life by Willie Vlautin. So there you go. Those were 5 great lit fic books that I read in 2024. If you like this, please check out other videos on my channel. I read pretty widely, which sometimes people don't like. Sometimes people just want to stick with one genre or one niche, but I do read pretty widely, and I'll make videos about lots of different things. So hopefully you can find something you like on the channel. Once again, my name is Carl. This has been Please Read Your Book, and I hope to see you again soon.